Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles, and on this episode, we're reviewing the Netflix limited series documentary, Mr. McMahon. Now for this, I'm going to just do a quick recap of every episode. I'm not going to go into much detail. Each episode I'm going to rate on a 1 to 5 scale, 1 being worst, 5 being best. I will mention right up front, there are episodes that deal with unaliving, accidents, SA, trafficking. So if any of that is triggering to you, feel free to click off of this video. With that being said, let's jump right into this. Episode 1, titled Junior. They do come right out in the beginning and let us know that most of this was recorded in 2021 before a lot of the allegations and stuff that's gone on over the past few years has come out. So if you do watch this, take that under consideration when you hear how people talk about Vince McMahon and the reverence they have in their voice towards him. I do think that it's important to put that in context. For this, it does cover his youth, his upbringing, how he didn't meet his father till he was 12, his complex relationship with his father, how he started in wrestling, kind of taking over the business, bringing in Hulk Hogan, the beginning of, Hulkamania there. They do cover some of the controversies here right off the bat. The John Stossel incident with Dr. D. David Schultz, the Richard Belzer incidents with Hogan himself. This leads up to WrestleMania, and obviously they do the talking points. WrestleMania was all or nothing for them. They could have lost everything. I thought this was a really good episode. I'm going to give this one a 5. I thought it was excellent. Next up, episode 2, which is called Heat. We start off with them talking about Jesse Ventura wanting to start a union right before WrestleMania 2 and potentially having a walkout either at WrestleMania 2 or a Madison Square Garden show, which I hadn't heard that part of the story. There is very interesting news here. Hulk Hogan, who is one of the talking heads during the show, admits that he's the one that sold Ventura out, which I don't think I've ever seen him do that before. So that is a breakthrough, Hulk Hogan telling the truth. We talk a little bit about WrestleMania 2, then obviously they cover the huge event, which is WrestleMania 3. They talk about Hogan potentially wanting to leave for movies and Vince not being ready for him to do that, so they create No Holds Barred. Then they go right over to maybe transitioning out to the Ultimate Warrior, how that kind of fizzled out, which leads us right into WrestleMania 7 with Sergeant Slaughter. And you start to see Vince himself even thinks that maybe some of this was a little bit of a mistake, hindsight being 2020. We cover some more of the scandals here, the steroid trial with Dr. Zaharian, how they tried to get Hogan to flip, Hogan leaving for WCW in the middle of the trial. They cover very briefly the Jimmy Superfly Snooka, Nancy Argentino stuff, which I'll talk about here in the end of this show, or at the end of the video. We get the Ring Boy scandal with Mel Phillips, Terry Garvin, and Pat Patterson. They do all mention that Pat seems to have got put in there undeservingly, except for Tony Atlas. Tony Atlas, who I think is one of the better talking heads on here, he comes off as being down to earth, honest, and earnest, and he mentions that Pat Patterson grabbed him by his personal part. And when he was questioned about why didn't you tell somebody, he said, who are you going to tell? The only person above him on the food chain is Vince, and he doesn't care. Kind of interesting context there. I've always kind of heard it both ways, that Pat maybe has some skeletons, maybe not. They do go into the Reader Chatterton stuff here, which is awesome that they covered this. I was kind of afraid with WWE being involved, at least partially through this, that stuff like this would not be touched on. We get the obligatory Ted Turner WCW stuff, him starting up a rival company. I thought this was another really good episode. I'm giving this a 5 as well. Next episode is episode 3, titled Screwjob, which you can guess what this is probably going to be about. It does start off on a little bit of a time jump. We go back to see the Wendy Richter Spider Lady, aka Moolah Screwjob, where Wendy did not want to drop the belt and they basically screwed her out of it. I think they show that more to give context to everything that's going to come up here. We see the not guilty verdict for the steroid trial for Vince. We start talking about the New Generation era and Bret Hart being the leader of that. We go into the Monday Night Wars and some of the things that Bischoff does, stuff that most wrestling fans have seen talked about already. They cover the Curtain Call, the NWO, and obviously the Montreal Screwjob. Again, I thought this was another good episode. Not quite as good as the first two, so I'm going to give this one a 4. Next episode's episode 4, Attitude. Again, you can tell what they're going to talk about here. It does start off very interestingly with something I never previously put together, and that is that the Mr. McMahon character took a lot from his favorite wrestler, Dr. Jerry Graham. Even the strut. And when you see this on this video or in this show, you're never going to see the Vince McMahon strut the same again, because you're always now going to see it as a ripoff of the Jerry Graham strut. I digress. They talk about the rise of Austin, the Mr. McMahon character, the rise of The Rock here, and then obviously the one that's the scandal here. Each show seems to have at least one scandal, this one being the death of Owen Hart, which is really, really sad, one of the saddest moments in wrestling history in my opinion. I do think this was handled very well. I'm giving this one a 4 as well. Now, next up, episode 5, called Family Business. We get a little backstory on Stephanie, Shane, Linda, and their involvement in the company. We do get the story with Trish Stratus and the whole bark like a dog incident, which I highly recommend being one of the things you pay most attention to, because Trish Stratus and the way she explains things kind of changed my mind on it. Not fully, but a little bit. We cover him buying WCW here, then the XFL, which was kind of his next challenge since he didn't have competition, and that being a failure. WrestleMania 18 with The Rock and Hogan, the rise of John Cena, and then Shane departing, which was very interesting. There's a very interesting story with Paul Heyman here, which again is something I highly recommend you watching. For this, I'm giving this episode a 5. I think it was high quality. Again, it's right back on par with the first couple episodes. Then we get to the final episode, episode 6, The Finish. They cover Trump, his involvement in WrestleMania 23, and overall involvement in the business, and how wrestling has permeated into even politics. We get one of the huge scandals here, Benoit and his unaliving other people. We talk about concussions, CTE, Kristen Nowinski's brought in. Then they go into the PG era, the woman's evolution, Shane coming back for WrestleMania 32, that full circle moment, and just wanting acceptance from his father. We get into Vince's first retirement, the original accusations, him coming back, selling to Endeavor, the Janelle Grant stuff, and then the one thing that I really wanted to see them cover, the Ashley Mazzaro stuff, which they do here, and I'm very happy that they did, even though the story itself is very heartbreaking. I'm giving this episode a 5 as well. I thought it was really good. Overall, I do have a lot of positives to say about this. As a wrestling fan for basically the majority of Vince McMahon's run, it's always been something I wanted to see. The one guy that you wanted to see do a sit-down interview was Vince. Now, how much of this is in character, how much of it is not, it's kind of hard to say. I feel like it's a different character than I've ever seen, or a different persona than I've ever seen of him. A lot of the talking heads add a whole lot of context, whether it be Bret Hart, Hulk Hogan. Hulk Hogan does a great job here, surprisingly. Tony Atlas being the best of the bunch, in my opinion. He comes off as the most normal person. Booker T, Paul Heyman, Bruce Pritchard, of course, to give the company line. Meltzer comes off really well in this. They add so much context and so much to that. I do enjoy most of what was done with them. The couple little gripes that I have is I wish they would have spent more time on the Jimmy Snuka incident. It feels like it kind of got glossed over, and I feel like that's a major story that we need to break open a little bit more and really talk about Vince McMahon's involvement in it. Whether that be nothing, whether that be something, I'd like to see more of that. I will say I do feel they touched on pretty much everything scandal, success, little minutia-wise, that you could cover in a 6-hour series that covers a 50-year career. I mean, there's always going to be little things that are missed there, but I think they pretty much got all of the really big things. I can't honestly think of something major that was missed that wasn't talked about here. So yeah, I do think that's really good. A lot of this, if you're a wrestling fan, is stuff that you've seen over and over again, but I do think they found a way to make it compelling, give little different spins and takes and different talking heads on things. So I do think it's interesting, even though a lot of these stories are ones we've heard 50 times already. Overall, I'm going to give this a 5. I thought it was really well done. I highly recommend it for any pro wrestling fan. Even if you're not a wrestling fan, if you're just someone that likes documentaries, like let's say Tiger King or any of the true crime stuff, this might be for you as well. Again, I give it a 5. I do highly recommend it. You should probably check it out. I did enjoy it. Even though we do know that Vince McMahon allegedly has done some horrible things, it is a great look at one of the most important characters in the history of pro wrestling. Love him, hate him, totally despise him, no matter how you feel, you cannot deny his importance, and I think it's something that every wrestling fan should probably check out. With all that being said, my name is George Coles, and this has been my review of the Netflix limited series, Mr. McMahon.